Good day everyone. We will discuss the notes to the financial statement Part 2 under FAS 24 and PFRS 8. Related parties. Ability to affect the financial and operating decisions of the other party through control, significant influence, or joint control. Ang related parties, ito yung party na may ability to affect the financial statement and operating decisions ng ibang party through control, significant influence, or joint control. Ano nga ba ang control, significant influence, or joint control? Ang control, ito yung ability ng isang party na may power to govern. And makaka-gain lang ng control ang isang party pag ang ownership mo ay more than half ng voting power of the entity. Next, meron ka dapat significant influence. Yung kaya mo mag-participate sa planning, decision-making, at operation ng business but you can't control. And makakagain ka lang ng significant influence pag ang ownership mo ay 20% or more. Sa joint control, kailangan may contractual agreement to control over an economic activity. And itong mga examples ng related parties. I-explain ko ang dalawang example ng related parties. First, yung sa key personal management. Sila yung person na may authority and responsibility for planning, directing, and controlling the entity. Next, yung sa close family member naman. Sila yung person na expected to influence or be influenced by the person in his or her dealings with reporting entity. And these are the following not related parties. For better understanding, tingnan natin ang illustration na ito. Mr. X is a director in A-Co and also in B-Co. Analysis. The related parties are A-Co and Mr. X and B-Co. And Mr. X because Mr. X is a key management personnel of these companies. A-Co and B-Co are not related parties simply because they have an interlocking director. Ano nga ba ang mga kailangan i-disclose? Ang mga kailangan i-disclose ay ang parent-subsidiary relationship regardless of whether there have been transactions between them. And yung key management personnel compensation broken down into following categories. And binigyan ito ng abbreviation as FATS. Short-term employee benefits, post-employment benefits, other long-term benefits, termination benefits, and share-based payment. Next, yung related party transaction. Ang related party transaction is a transfer of resources, services, or obligations between a reporting entity and the related party, regardless of whether a price is charged. Ito ang mga example of transactions that are disclosed if they are with a related party. First, purchases or sales of goods, services, or other assets. Leases, transfers of research and development, transfers under license agreements, loans and other financing agreements including equity contributions, provision of guarantees or collateral, commitments, settlement of liabilities by or on behalf of either party, participation by a parent or subsidiary in a defined benefit plan wherein risks are shared. Yung mga transaction na i-disclose during the period covered by the financial statement. First, nature of the related party relationship. Nature, terms, and amount of the transaction and outstanding. Doubtful debts are recognized on the outstanding balances. So, related party transaction and their outstanding balances are disclosed in an entity separate or individual financial statement. However, may eliminate ito in the group's consolidated financial statement. Disclosures that related party transactions were on arm's length basis are not made unless this can be substantiated. Ito yung illustration about separated and consolidated financial statement. Ang requirements determine the amount of related party disclosure and ABC's separate financial statement and the group consolidated financial statement. Let us now compute a separate financial statement. Key management personnel compensation includes directors and officers remuneration 2 million, post-employment benefits of officers 200,000, fringe benefits in the form of housing assistance to directors in office 5 million, share options granted to officers 300,000, pag pinag-add 7,500,000. Related party transactions and outstanding balances includes loans to directors and officers 3 million, sales to related entities 10 million, pag pinag-add, makakuha tayo ng 13 million. And i-add din yung 7,500,000. 13 million plus 7,500,000, ang total ay 20,500,000. Para dito sa separate financial statement. For consolidated financial statement, key management personnel compensation ay same lang ng separate financial statement. Parehas lang nakuha ng 7,500,000. Party transaction and outstanding balances includes loans to directors and officers 3 million. And yung 3 million i-add sa 7,500,000. Makakakuha tayo ng total of 10,500,000 para sa consolidated financial statement. Makikita natin dito sa consolidated financial statement, wala yung sales to related entities na meron sa separate financial statement. Kasi, yung 10 million sales to related entities are excluded because intercompany transactions and outstanding balances are eliminated in the consolidated financial statement.
Operating segments. An operating segment is a component of an entity. A. That engage in business activities from which it may earn revenues and incur expenses, including revenues and expenses related to transactions with other components of the same entity. B. Whose operating results are regularly reviewed by the entity's chief operating decision maker to make decisions about resources to be allocated to the segment and assess its performance. So, pag sinabing chief operating decision maker, ito yung COO, CEO, executive director, or others. C. For which discrete financial information is available. A component of an entity comprises operations and cash flows that can be clearly distinguished, operationally and for financial reporting purposes, from the rest of the entity. Hindi lahat ng part ng entity ay kailangan sa operating segment. Para ma-qualify ang operating segment, ito dapat ay profit center, used internally by management for decision making, and on which separate financial information is available. So, ano ang dapat i-report at ano ang hindi? Meron tayong reportable segments. An operating segment is reportable if it A. Is used by management in internal reporting or results from aggregating two or more segments, and B. Qualifies under the quantitative thresholds. Limit on the number or reportable segments. There may be a practical limit to the number of reportable segments that an entity separately discloses, beyond which segment information may become too detailed, although no precise limit has been determined, as the number of segments that are reportable in accordance with the quantitative threshold increases above 10. The entity should consider whether a practical limit has been reached. So, pwedeng limitahan ang number ng reportable segments kapag sobrang detailed na. Aggregation criteria. Two or more operating segments may be aggregated into a single operating segment if aggregation is consistent with the core principle of PFRS 8. The segments have similar economic characteristics and the segments are similar in each of the following respects. A. Nature of the products and services. B. Nature of the production processes. C. Type or class of customer for their products and services. D. The methods used to distribute their products or provide their services. And E. Nature of the regulatory environment if the applicable banking, insurance, or public utilities. Quantitative thresholds. An operating segment is reportable if it meets any of the following. A. Its revenue, including both external and inter-segment sales, is 10% or more of the total revenue, external and internal, of all operating segments. B. Its profit or loss is 10% or more of the greater, in absolute amount, of the total profit of all operating segments that reported a profit, and total loss of all operating segments that reported a loss. C. Its assets are 10% or more of the total assets of all operating segments. So, dito, kailangan munang ma-meet ang percentage ng tatlo, the revenue, profit or loss, and assets, bago maging reportable operating segment. Illustration ng quantitative thresholds. Entity A is preparing its year-end financial statements and has identified the following operating segments. So, dito nakalagay yung segments A, B, C, D, E, and the revenues, the profit or loss, and assets. Nandito na rin yung total amounts nila. So, ang requirement, identify the reportable segments. Dito madami tayong gagawin na test at ang una ay revenue test. The threshold under the revenue test is 300,000. So, paano nakuha yun? 3 million total revenues times 10%. Segments A and B qualify under this test because their respective revenues are at least 300,000. So, pasok si A and B kasi nalagpasan nila yung 300,000 or at least 300,000. Pangalawang test is profit or loss test. Step 1. Total separately the profits and losses of the operating segment. So, dito pinaghiwalay ang profit and loss. Step 2. Determine the higher between the total amounts in absolute terms. The higher amount is used for the 10% test. Based on the table, the aggregate losses of 770,000 is higher than the aggregate profits. Therefore, the 10% threshold for profit or loss is 77,000. 770,000 times 10%. Segments A and B and also D qualify under this test. So, ito yung table na pumasa yung A, B, and D sa 10% test ng profit or loss test. Pangatlong test is assets test. The threshold under the asset test is 4,640,000. So, equivalent to sa 46,400,000 total assets times 10%. Segments A, B, and C are reportable because each of their total assets is at least 4,640,000. Conclusion. Based on all the tests performed, the reportable segments are A, B, C, and D. Each of these segments will be disclosed separately in the notes. So, dito makikita na yung A, B, C, and D ay pumasa sa mga nasabing test. So, si E ay hindi reportable dahil hindi siya nakapasa sa anumang quantitative test. Operating segments not meeting any of the quantitative thresholds. A. Operating segments that do not meet any of the quantitative thresholds may be considered reportable and separately disclosed if management believes that information about the segments would be useful to users of the financial statements. B. An entity may combine information about operating segments that do not meet the quantitative thresholds with information about other operating segments that do not meet the quantitative thresholds to produce a reportable segment, only if the operating segments have similar economic characteristics and share a majority of the aggregation criteria. Illustration ng management approach and aggregation. ABC Company engaged in 5 diversified operations, namely operations A, B, C, D, and E. Information of on these segments is shown below. So, ito yung information na nasa table. Additional information. A. For internal reporting purposes, segments A and B are considered as one operating segment. B. Segment E is considered as an operating segment for internal decision-making purposes. C. Segments C and D have similar economic characteristics and share a majority of the aggregation criteria. Requirement: identify the reportable segments. Solution: under the management approach, segments E are reportable operating segments because these segments are used by ABC Company in its internal reporting. Segments C and D are subjected to the quantitative thresholds as shown below. The combined revenue of C and D of 200 equivalent to 50 plus 150 is equal to the revenue threshold of 200. 2,000 times 10%. Therefore, C and D shall be disclosed as one reportable segment. ABC Company shall disclose 3 reportable segments in its notes of financial statements, namely A, B, E, and CD. Limit in external revenue. If the total external revenues of the identified reportable segments are less than 75% of the entity's total external revenue, additional operating segments are included as reportable even if they do not meet the quantitative threshold until at least 75% of the entity's external revenue is included in reportable segments. Additional reportable segments are identified based on management judgment. So, nakabase pa rin sa management judgment yung pag-identify ng additional reportable segments. Illustration ng limit on external revenue. ABC Company is preparing its year-end financial statements and has identified the following operating segments. Solution: under the revenue test, segments A and B are reportable because they each have total revenues, or external and internal, exceeding the threshold of 300,000, equivalent to 3 million times 10%. Under the profit or loss test, segments A and B are reportable because they each have profit exceeding the threshold of 140,000, equivalent to 1,400,000 times 10%. Under the total assets test, segments A and B are reportable because they each have total assets exceeding the threshold of 2,200,000, equivalent to 22 million times 10%. However, the sum of the external revenues of segments A and B does not meet the 75% limit as shown. Therefore, if management believes that of the other segments, information on segment C is most relevant to users, segment C shall be disclosed as a reportable segment even if it does not meet any of the quantitative thresholds in order for the 75% limit to be met. If segment C is included as reportable segment, the total external revenues of reportable segments A, B, and C is 1,850,000, which meets the 75% limit of 1,725,000. ABC Company shall disclose 3 reportable segments in its notes to financial statements, namely segments A, B, and C. Segments D, E, and F are combined and disclosed as all other segments. So, kasama si Segment C dahil naniniwala ang management na relevant ito sa users. Segment ceasing to be reportable. If management judges that an operating segment is identified as a reportable segment in the immediately preceding period is of continuing significance, information about that segment shall continue to be reported separately in the current period, even if it no longer meets the quantitative threshold criteria. Segment becoming reportable. If an operating segment is identified as a reportable segment in the current period in accordance with the quantitative thresholds, segment data for a prior period presented for comparative purposes shall be restated to reflect the newly reportable segment as a separate segment, even if that segment did not satisfy the quantitative threshold criteria in the prior period, unless the necessary information is not available and the cost to develop it would be excessive. Limit on the number or reportable segments. There may be a practical limit to the number of reportable segments that an entity separately discloses, beyond which segment information may become too detailed, although no precise limit has been determined, as the number of segments that are reportable in accordance with the quantitative threshold increases above 10. The entity should consider whether a practical limit has been reached. So, pwedeng limitahan ang number ng reportable segments kapag sobrang detailed na. Summary of procedures in determining reportable segments. Number 1. Operating segments are identified based on management's internal reporting system. Number 2. Segments that have similar economic characteristics and are similar in all of the respects enumerated in PFRS 8 are aggregated. Number 3. The segments are tested under the quantitative thresholds. Number 4. Segments not qualifying under any of the quantitative thresholds but have similar economic characteristics and are similar in a majority of the respects enumerated in PFRS 8 are aggregated, and their combined revenues, profit or loss, and assets are tested under the quantitative thresholds. Number 5. The total external revenues of the identified reportable segments is tested under the 75% limit on external revenues. Additional operating segments shall be identified as reportable segments even if they do not meet the quantitative threshold, until at least 75% of the entity's external revenue is included in reportable segments. Number 6. Non-reportable segments are combined and Summary of procedures in determining reportable segments. Number 1. Operating segments are identified based on management's internal reporting system. Number 2. Segments that have similar economic characteristics and are similar in all of the respects enumerated in PFRS 8 are aggregated. Number 3. The segments are tested under the quantitative thresholds. Number 4. Segments not qualifying under any of the quantitative thresholds but have similar economic characteristics and are similar in a majority of the respects enumerated in PFRS 8 are aggregated, and their combined revenues, profit or loss, and assets are tested under the quantitative thresholds. Number 5. The total external revenues of the identified reportable segments is tested under the 75% limit on external revenues. Additional operating segments shall be identified as reportable segments even if they do not meet the quantitative threshold, until at least 75% of the entity's external revenue is included in reportable segments. Number 6. Non-reportable segments are combined and disclosed in an all other segments category.
So after we finish identifying reportable segments and na-identify na din natin kung sino ang reportable at hindi, we need to make appropriate disclosures. So we have four categories of disclosure. Number one is general information. Number two is information about profit or loss, assets and liabilities. And three is reconciliation. And lastly, entity-wide disclosures. So in general information, there are factors used to identify the entity's reportable segments. So, for example, whether management has chosen to organize the entity around differences in products and services, geographical areas, regulatory environments, or a combination of factors, and whether operating segments have been aggregated. So, in judgment made by the management in applying the aggregation criteria, dito naman pumapasok yung mga common na mga produkto or combined aggregated services, products and services, dito natin siya dinidisclose. And number three is the types of products and services from which each reportable segments derive its revenues. So dito naman sa information about profit or loss, assets and liabilities, PFRS 8 requires an entity to report a measure of profit or loss for each reportable segments. Also, it requires to report a measure of total assets and liabilities for each reportable segment if such amounts are regularly provided to the chief operating decision maker. So another one is it is required to be disclosed if the specified amounts are included in the measure of segments of P&L reviewed by the chief operating decision maker, and regularly we provide it to the CODM even if not included in the measure of segment of P&L or profit or loss. So in revenues, here's the list of the accounts that we need to disclose, and kailangan natin tong tandaan dahil later on dun sa disclosure part, it will matter. So for the reporting of interest revenue and interest expense, interest revenue and interest expense are reported separately for each reportable segment unless the segment's revenue is primarily from interest. Like for example, the segment is a financial institution and internal decision making is based on net interest revenue. In such cases, the entity may report the segment's interest revenue net of interest expense and disclose that fact. So for the information on segments assets, the amount of investment in associates and joint ventures accounted for by the equity method and the amounts of addition to non-current assets, other financial instrument, deferred tax assets, post-employment benefit assets, and rights arising under insurance contracts shall disclose if the specified amounts are included in the measure of segments assets reviewed by the chief operating decision maker or are otherwise regularly provided to the chief operating decision maker even if not included in the measures of segments assets. A reconciliation is an explanation of the relation of individual members to total numbers, and as a minimum, we should reconcile revenues, profit or loss, asset and liab, every other materials term of information disclosed. So changes in internal organization. If an entity changes the structure of its internal organization in a manner that causes the composition of its reportable segments to change, the corresponding information for earlier periods, including interim period, shall be restated unless the information is not available and the cost to develop it would be excessive. So the last one is the entity-wide disclosure. It is the last of the categories. Entity-wide disclosure apply to all entities subject to PFRS 8, provided only if it is not provided as part of the reportable segment information. So here, we can see information about products and services. Number 2 is the information about geographic areas, and number 3 is the information about major customers. So in entity-wide disclosures apply to all entities subject to PFRS 8, provided only if it is not provided as a part of the reportable segment information. So meron tayong tatlo na information that should be disclosed. Number 1 is the information about products and services. Number 2 is the information about geographic areas, revenues from external customers that are directly attributable to entity country of domicile, and also attributable to foreign countries. Then the non-current asset, which is located in the country of domicile, and if the non-current asset is material, meaning it takes effect doon sa ating operations, it should be disclosed too, even if it is located to foreign countries. So number 3 is the information about major customers. So a major customer should have or should provide 10% or more of the entity's revenue. So the entity need not disclose the identity of a major customer or the amount of revenues that each segment report from that customer. For the purpose of this disclosure, a group of customers under common control, such as the subsidiaries of common parent or various government agencies, are considered as a single customer. So to provide you a greater insight, magpo-provide tayo ng example kung paano ginagamit itong mga disclosures na to. So here in our problem, ito po ay operating segment, and the ABC company has the following information during the current year 2020. So we have the balance sheet, income statement, and the additional informations. And also the requirement is we should prepare the disclosure requirements for both reportable and non-reportable segments. So first, kailangan muna nating i-distinguish kung ano yung mga information or kung ano yung mga ilalagay natin sa reportable segments, profit or loss, assets and liabilities. So kanina, doon sa ating example, doon sa list ng ating mga 4 reconciliations, meron akong pinakita na mga list of items which should be disclosed or which should be included in the information about the reportable segments, profit or loss, assets and liabilities. So first on the list is we should identify dun sa profit and loss kung ano ba yung mga kailangan nating i-disclose. Number 1 is sabi dito sa information about profit or loss, assets and liabilities, we should look for revenues from external customers. So, saan nga ba napupunta yung revenues from external customers? So, ito po siya, yung external sales natin, which amounts to 20 million. So, we put it in the revenues from external sources, which is amounting to 20 million. So, by the way, yung other segments, C and F, na-identify siya as non-reportable. So, dito natin siya nilagay sa other segments. So, meron tayong 20 million sales. Then, the next one would be the internal sales, which is kasama siya dun sa list ng ating revenues from transaction with other operating segments of the same entity. So, meron tayong internal sales which amounts to 1,680,000. Ito yung tinatawag din nating internal sales, tinatawag din natin siyang intersegment revenues. So, number 3, doon sa ating list is yung interest expense and also yung interest revenues. But since dito sa problem natin, wala naman tayong nakita or wala naman tayong na-distinguish na merong interest revenue, i-include na lang natin yung interest expense which is 206,200. So, in our table, makikita nyo na meron tayong 206,200 for the interest expense. Next one is the depreciation expense. So, dun sa depreciation expense natin, ang kukunin natin is yung total ng lahat ng depreciation and also pagsasamahin natin yung C and F which is combined to dun sa other segment. So, meron tayong depreciation expense amounting to 3,695,400. So, profit or loss, dito naman sa profit or loss natin, kinukuha natin dito yung NIBT or yung net income before tax. So dito makikita natin na meron tayong 3,500,000 for segment A, 1,250,000 and negative 450,000, 500,000 and 250,000 and 50,000 respectively for segment A to segment F. So dito na-list na din natin siya as a profit or loss ng ating segments. So the next one is yung assets natin. So yung sa assets natin, makikita naman natin siya dito sa first part ng ating balance sheet. So dito sa total asset natin, meron tayong 6,900,000 sa segment B and 800,000 sa segment C. And respectively, dun sa mga susunod. So meron tayong assets amounting to 10 million. So the last one would be the liabilities. So dun sa liabilities natin, titingnan lang natin yung total liabilities natin dito, which is yung accounts payable, accrued expense, and bonds payable. So meron tayong total liabilities amounting to 2,300,000. So upon viewing our problem, we go straight up dun sa disclosure requirements natin, which is naka-enumerate na dito yung mga accounts na kailangan natin for segment A, B, D, E, and other segments, which kakailanganin natin for the reconciliation of reportable segments, revenues, profit or loss, assets, and liabilities. So the first part of our reconciliation involves revenues. So yung total revenues for reportable segments natin is amounted to 18,280,000. So saan natin kinuha yung 18,280,000 natin? Ito yung joint amount or total of revenues from external sources and intersegment revenues or internal sales. Then, kinuha din natin yung amount dun sa other segments natin, which is yung non-reportable naman natin. Yung non-reportable segment natin na combined C and F, which amounted to 3,400,000. So, dun sa pag-eliminate of intersegment revenues, so for our internal sales or yung intersegment sales natin, hindi siya kino-considered as sales as far as ABC company is concerned. Why? Because it is only a transfer of resources from one segment to another, which is nagre-revolve lang yung resources niya and hindi siya galing sa outside customers natin. So, kung ito total kasi natin yung external sales natin, meron tayong makukuhang sales of 20 million doon sa, meron tayong nakastate na 20 million doon sa income statement, which is external sales lang siya. Ibig sabihin, yung internal sales natin, hindi natin siya kino-considered as sales. So next, okay, so para makuha natin yung total revenue ng ating entity or ng ating company, ng ABC company, kailangan nating i-eliminate or i-remove yung intersegment revenues natin, which amounted to 1,680,000. So ito po siya. Then, ang makukuha na natin sa entity's total revenue would amounted to 20 million pesos. So dito sa profit or loss na reconciliation natin of reportable segments, kailangan natin kunin yung total profit or loss for reportable segment natin. So yung profit or loss for reportable segment natin is 5,500,000. So saan natin siya kinuha? Dito po sa segment A, B, D, and E na income. So yung total ng A, B, D, E segment would amount to 5,500,000. So sa other profit or loss naman po natin, ito yung ini-include na natin yung non-reportable segment natin, which is yung C and F. So kung makikita natin dito sa balance sheet natin and also dun sa problem natin, yung NIBT po ng segment C, yung net income before tax po ng segment C, amounted to the loss or incur a loss of 450,000 and segment F incur a loss of 50,000. So pag plinas po natin siya, negative 500,000, yan po yung ima-minus natin para makuha naman po natin yung segment profit or loss, which is 5 million. So kailangan din po natin i-eliminate yung intersegment profit po natin. So ano ba yung intersegment profit natin? So para makuha natin yung intersegment profit, kailangan nating tignan yung internal sales natin na 1,440,000 and 240,000. Ililess natin siya sa cost of sales on internal sales natin, which is meron tayong na-incur na 576,000 and 72,000 doon sa ating internal sales. So pag in-eliminate natin siya or pag kinuha natin yung total niya, it will amount to 1,032,000. So, another thing to keep is yung attributable to corporate headquarters, since meron nga tayong corporate headquarters. So, meron tayong share in profit of the associate, which is yung 400,000 natin na makikita natin dito sa ating income statement. So, meron tayong share in profit of the associate, which amounts to 400,000. And also, meron tayong unrealized gain from change in investment property na 500,000. So yung 500,000 na yun, makikita din natin siya sa income statement ng ating entity for the year ended. Then, meron tayong depreciation na 100,000. So, aside from the depreciation expense, which amounts to 3,795,400, meron din kasi dito sa additional information natin na meron din tayong depreciation expenses includes dun sa corporate assets natin, which amounts to 100,000. So, kailangan din natin siyang i-disclose. So, ang ating magiging net income before tax, if we would add up all the accounts na na-disclose natin, makakuha tayo ng NIBT na 4,768,000, which is yun din po yung ating NIBT, yung 4,768,000 doon sa ating income statement. The next one would be the assets of reportable segments or yung mga assets natin doon sa segment A, B, D, and E. So ito total lang po natin yung mga assets natin doon sa segment A, B, D, and E para makuha natin yung total assets from reportable segments. So again, ganun din, keep in mind na meron tayong assets from reportable segments and meron din tayong assets from non-reportable segments, which amounts to 1,750,000. Then, meron din tayong mga corporate assets na tinatawag. Since meron nga tayong corporate headquarters, nag-incur din siya ng assets or meron din siyang mga assets like yung equipment, building, tapos investment in property, and also yung investment in associate that we have to record din para makuha natin yung total asset per financial position. So, pag tinignan natin yung problem dun sa corporate headquarters, meron siyang asset na nanggaling sa equipment, building, investment property, investment in associates. So, respectively, meron siyang 900,000 sa equipment and investment in associate na 600,000. So, pag tinotal natin siya, makukuha natin yung total assets natin, which is as per financial position, meron daw tayong 14 million na asset. So pag in-add up natin tong total asset na to, makukuha natin yung 14 million. So same process lang din dun sa assets of reportable segments. Ganun din, uulitin din natin yung process dun sa pagkuha naman ng total liabilities as per financial position. So sa liabilities natin, kukunin natin una yung mga reportable segment muna natin, which is yung A, B, D, and E. So meron siyang total na 1,897,500. Then sa liabilities to non-reportable segment natin, which is yung combined C and F, meron tayong total na 402,500. So meron din tayong corporate liabilities, which is dahil meron nga tayong corporate headquarters, meron din tayong na-incur na accrued expenses, which amounts to 800,000 and bonds payable na 2 million pesos. So, i-add up lang din natin siya para makuha natin yung total liabilities as per financial position. So, punta naman tayo sa next part ng ating problem, which is yung the distribution of the entity's revenues, which is yung the geographical distribution na na-discuss din natin earlier. So, dito, ipa-percentage lang natin yung mga segments based on their geographical operations. Ipa-percentage natin yung revenues based on their geographical operations. So dito, ginawa ko siya. Balik, kukunin muna natin yung segment A, B, D, and E, which is yan yung priority natin for the reportable segments. And syempre, include na din natin yung other segments, which is yung non-reportable natin na C and F, na may total tayo na 20 million. So sa distribution of revenues, as stated in the problem, meron tayong US, Philippines, and United Kingdom. So dito, itatali lang natin yung, for example, sa segment A ng US, sa revenues ng US sa segment A or sa product A, naka-incur siya ng 80% of the sales or 80% of the revenues. So, ganun lang din sa mga susunod pa natin na mga geographical locations. So, kailangan mag-total din siya dun sa total revenues from external sources natin. Again, hindi natin sinasama yung internal sources natin dahil sa loob lang ng company yun and transfer of resources lang yung ginagawa natin, which is not considerably a sales. So dun sa other segments din, in-add din natin siya just to mapakita lang din yung other segments natin, which amounts to 3,400,000. Okay, lastly, yung information about major customers natin. So yung information about major customers natin, meron dito sa problem na additional information out of the total revenues of segment A, sales to DF Corporation amounted to 3 million. So in order for us, para makita yung 10% threshold ng ating total revenues, kailangan ilabas natin yung sales or yung revenues natin na 20 million. Then, ita-times natin siya sa 10% na threshold, which is 2 million pesos. So, yung 3 million na DEF, supposedly, yung DEF is a single major customer natin. So, kailangan din natin siyang i-report as a major customer natin. So, meron daw po siyang out of the total revenues of segment A, which amounts to 11,600,000, meron daw siyang na-contribute doon or bumili siya doon ng 3 million. So, dito sa sales natin na 20 million, kailangan lang natin i-provide yung 10% threshold para makita natin kung sakto ba siya or lumagpas siya doon sa threshold at kailangan natin siyang i-report as a single major customer. So, dito, wala naman tayong kailangan ilagay. Actually, yung just the thought na meron siyang sale, naka-incur tayo ng sale amounting to 3 million, which contributed by a single customer of segment A, the DEF Corp. Pero just to check na din, kailangan din natin syempre i-compute kung magkano yung 10% threshold natin for the revenue. And that's about it. Thank you.